This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Today we are talking well-being once again. We are thinking about how we can take a whole school approach to well-being and why such an approach is necessary, particularly in this day and age.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
The happiest of 27th of Aprils to you all. It is so nice to be back. I can't believe it's been 2 weeks since we last had breakfast together, but at the same time, I can't believe it's only been 2 weeks since we last had breakfast together. A lot has happened in the past couple of weeks. It is, of course, that time of year where those of us that teach subjects that have non-examined components, coursework or speaking exams in my case, we are kind of all hands on deck trying to get everything done, recorded, uploaded, marked in some cases, all ahead of the deadlines, while still continuing to prepare those kids for their written exams, while still remembering that we have kids who are not in exam and geo groups who also need high quality care and high quality teaching. So this is a really intense time of year. I saw a video this morning which was a teacher saying, if we can just get through this week, then everything will calm down. And then we kind of saw him saying the exact same thing in September, in October, in November, in December, in January, in February, in March, in April, in May, in June, and in July. Because that is how it feels, isn't it? We're kind of always waiting for things to calm down. We're always waiting for that magical moment where everything will fall into place, where all of the kids will have done their homework, where they will all be impeccably behaved and so not need detention, where just everything will be okay. But that time never comes. And somehow, even though we all know this, you only have to make it through your first year of teaching to know that magical week where everything calms down is never going to come. We still kind of hope for it, I guess, because sometimes hope is all that there is. Hope is what gets you through the day. Hope and good colleagues, I will say, and I must say I'm very grateful for my colleagues at my school right now. We are currently deep in speaking exams. We have had GCSEs happening. I think our GCSEs are pretty much all done now. Our A levels in the MFL A levels that we teach that have speaking exams, because of course not all of them do, those are underway. I thankfully am done. All of my involvement is over. All of the languages that I teach have had their speaking exams done and dusted. Very, very proud of my students, I must say. Particularly my sixth formers, particularly my A-level students. They really have made me proud, and I really, really hope that their exam results reflect the hard work, the effort that they've put in, the progress that they've made, because they've done some really, really good work this year. And I think, just generally, I feel like by the time I speak to you next, in my school at least, we will be done. Everything will have been spoken, everything will have been recorded, everything will have been uploaded and transferred, photographs will have been photocopied, forms will have been signed, and then we will be ready to make that last push towards all of the other exams that we have coming up. But it got me to thinking, particularly combined with the awful news that we had on, was it Wednesday, with the school stabbing in Wales. It got me to thinking once again about well-being. Now, you know that every so often here on Saturday morning breakfast, I get on my well-being bandwagon, because for me, well-being is so important. It is so important. It always has been. I've always been interested in well-being. I've always been interested in making sure that people are okay. But particularly since COVID, I've had a real renewed interest in it because I found COVID fascinating, kind of at the time and now reflecting back on it. Because during we keep saying during COVID times, don't we? As if it's gone away, as if I didn't rock up to the chemist yesterday to pick up my prescription to see a line snaking around the shop for booster injections. But I guess during lockdown times is what I will say. You couldn't have a conversation with anybody without it starting with, "How are you? Are you okay? Is everybody in your family okay?" Because we were all going through the same thing. We were all going through the pandemic. We were all aware that people were not okay. But what I found really interesting is how over the past couple of years, since things have, in inverted commas, gone back to normal, that kind of outward concern has tailed off a lot. You don't have those conversations with people anymore asking if they're okay. We don't check in with people nearly as much as we used to. All of the, I say all, that's not true. A lot of the online meetups that people were attending have kind of disappeared because people were so ready to get back to things in person. They were so ready to meet again in the real world, that the cyberspace meets are slowly dwindling, are slowly disappearing. And I think that's really sad, because it seems to me like the culture of protecting people's well-being, the culture of protecting our colleagues, looking after our senior leaders, all of that, it seems to be going away. And so once again this week, that had me thinking about well-being. It had me thinking about pupil well-being as we move into the exam season. It had me thinking about the stress that our pupils are under, and what we can do to help to mitigate that. It got me thinking about teacher well-being, about workload. Clearly what happened in that Welsh school on Wednesday got me thinking about physical well-being, of being in a school, of being around literally hundreds of people, all of whom are going through something to varying degrees of severity. And so that's what we are thinking about today. I want to think about well-being at both child and adult levels. And I want to think about what we can do, how we can adopt, how we can facilitate a whole school approach to improving and safeguarding the well-being of everybody in our care.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
BBC News reports that MI5 has briefed Vice-Chancellors from 24 universities across the UK on the threat from foreign states which could undermine national security. The Vice-Chancellors were warned that cutting-edge research could be targeted by states seeking to boost their own militaries and economies. The Deputy Prime Minister has also announced a consultation on measures to protect UK universities. There has been no direct reference to any one state, but the government has previously warned that China could be gaining influence in British academic research. The institutions involved in the briefing included Oxford, Cambridge and Imperial College London. The head of the Russell Group said its members take their national security responsibilities incredibly seriously. The Chief Executive of Universities UK said the body has worked with government for several years. The latest particular threat could be to academic research that has a potential dual use in civilian and military life. The Guardian features the topic of Ofsted one-word judgments as it appears in the news once again. Reaction to the news features prominently in the article, with primary focus given to the views of Professor Julia Waters, sister of Ruth Perry. Ms Perry's death following an Ofsted inspection prompted a review of a range of aspects of the inspection process, with one-word judgments a main focus of interest. In a statement published on the 25th of April, the government has ruled that the judgments are here to stay. Professor Waters described the government's response to an inquiry by the Commons Education Committee as woefully inadequate. Teaching unions had backed calls for the scrapping of the single-word judgments and of more radical reform to the inspectorate in England. The announcement came as something of a shock, as days earlier the Sunday Times had published a story suggesting the single-word judgment would likely be scrapped. Government have stated that the headline grades provide a succinct and accessible summary for parents, and that they enable government to look at inspection outcomes across England. The statement went on to say they would continue to listen as part of the Big Listen public consultation, although many have criticised the wording of some of the questions, which appear to prevent clear, critical feedback. It seems that funding for education isn't just a hot topic for the UK. The BBC Latin American news site reports on protests in Buenos Aires as thousands of people took to the streets to demand increased funding for public universities. Argentina's president came to office in 2023 and vowed to take a chainsaw to public spending and justified the cuts by calling the state-run universities centres of socialist indoctrination. Ricardo Gelpi, rector of University of Buenos Aires, says the institution may have to close within 3 months without more funding. Pictures from the demonstration show tens of thousands of protesters dancing, playing instruments and holding banners. The BBC also report on a World Health Organization report which shows that a third of 11-year-olds and more than half of 13-year-olds in England have drunk alcohol. Girls were found to be more likely than boys to be drinking and getting drunk aged 15 in England, Wales and Scotland. The World Health Organization called on countries to introduce more measures to protect children. The report looked at data from 4,500 school-aged children from each country in Europe, Central Asia and Canada between 2021 and 22. The focus was on use of cigarettes, vaping, alcohol and cannabis among adolescents. The UK has always had relatively high alcohol use amongst young people, but it has been declining. On cannabis use, the report found more boys in Scotland had used the drug compared to all other countries. No data was provided for England. Smoking is much less common, but the report confirmed that vaping rates have overtaken it in most countries and are above average in the UK. Full details of the report can be found on the BBC website. Finally, Cambridge University's Fitzwilliam College has apologised to students after housekeeping staff allegedly embarrassed one individual by posting images of their messy room. Pictures of the communal areas and a bedroom were emailed around the college as an illustration of what housekeeping staff don't want to see. But the college has since apologised, saying the inclusion of the image of a bedroom was unacceptable and an invasion of privacy. Students had also complained that they were being woken up and asked to tidy communal areas too early, although the college says it has stopped this practice in response to feedback. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Now, you know that normally after the news I like to do a little bit of a response to what Joe has said, but there was just so much packed in this week that I'm not even sure where to start. So I think, given that it kind of fits in with today's theme of overarching policies for well-being, let's take a moment to unpack the idea that a university student's bedroom should be plastered around a campus as an example of what not to do. We've got the gross invasion of privacy there. A person's bedroom should be the most private space that they have. We all know about sleep hygiene. We all know about how your bedroom should be a place for certain activities, but not all. Don't watch TV before you go to bed. Don't scroll your phone before you try and fall asleep. Make your bedroom an oasis of calm. Now, depending on the amount of space that you have, that's not always practical. Sometimes our bedrooms have to double up as workspaces, or as storage spaces, or as a whole host of things. And so that itself can interrupt sleep hygiene, which we know is so incredibly important. So to then feel like the bedroom isn't your own personal space, to have that extra layer kind of put in, can interrupt that sleep hygiene even more. So even, beyond an embarrassment perspective, even beyond an invasion of privacy, which was kind of where this thought started, there is the fact that for these students' well-beings, that's not a good idea. It's not great to add that extra layer in. Now, I say this as somebody who didn't do halls or anything like that at uni. When I did my B.Ed, which was my first undergraduate degree, I did it in a brick and mortar uni that's close to where I live. And I just commuted every day to save money. And I did. I mean, I'm still paying off my student loan like 20 years later, but I dread to think how much I would have had to borrow if I hadn't lived at home. Tom has texted in to ask about the topic. I think that means you must have tuned in late, my friend. Today we are talking about whole school approaches to well-being. We are looking at well-being at a staff and a pupil level. That's all right. That is all right. You can, here on Saturday Morning Breakfast, we will take people no matter what time they wake up in the morning. We know that waking up early on a Saturday to join us from 9 o'clock straight away can be difficult. We know that we all like a bit of a lie-in. That's very important for well-being. I think it should be put into policies. And I will also say this is my fault because I did not post a topic card this week. Mostly because I changed my show topic. I was going to do something completely different. And longtime friends of Saturday Morning Breakfast will know that I do this fairly regularly. I was going to do a completely different topic until Wednesday, until we had that awful news coming from Wales, when once again I was prompted to revisit my interest in well-being, and particularly in teacher well-being. So this seems like a good place to remind anybody who may just be tuning in that you can be in touch with us here at Teacher Talk Radio if you have anything to say about either this show or any of the shows that we have on offer. So if you've got any suggestions, any ideas about both pupil and adult well-being at a whole school level, you can text in if you are listening live on the Podbean app. If you are listening live elsewhere, or if you are listening on the replay, you can tweet me. I am at Mr. D. Lester. That's MRDLESTER. It's all one word. And as I always say, I pick topics that interest me. It's why I tend to revisit the same few topics, but hopefully from a different angle, so that I'm not too boring for you. Because they are the things that I professionally am interested in. So I will always want to hear your thoughts, even if it is currently the 27th of April 2034, and it's not a Saturday morning. I've got no idea what day of the week that might be. But you can still text me, and you can still tell me what you think about teacher and pupil wellbeing, because I'm sure that I will still be very interested in what you have to say. But that is a good reason for me to come off topic of messy student bedrooms and return to the matter at hand, which is whole school approaches to both pupil and teacher well-being. Because, again, as I said at the top of the show, this is the time of year where the well-being of children and of adults begins to falter. Particularly begins to falter, I should say. I made a glib remark yesterday about year 2 to one of my colleagues, where I talked about how, even in year 2 in so many schools, the year is spent preparing for SATs. It's not spent doing play through learning. It is learning through play. It's not spent reading stories. It's not spent making pictures. It's spent getting ready for those exams. And that is not the fault of our EYFS Key Stage 1 colleagues, who do a remarkable job. I used to love my mornings doing French in reception year 1 and year 2, but I was always very, very glad when the afternoon came round and I could move back up to Key Stage 2, because it was exhausting. And so my hat's always off to our Foundation Stage, Key Stage 1 EYFS colleagues, because they do an amazing job. And having to prepare 6-year-olds to take exams without getting them stressed out, without making them hate school, is a real talent. It's a real talent. But it's also really sad that in this country, these children as young as 6 are taking these exams, when in so many other countries, they would just be starting school. So pupil well-being, it's not just about the sixth formers. It's not just about our A-level and GCSE pupils. It's about everybody in our care. And it's not just about exam stress. I'm using exam stress as my example today because that's kind of where we're at in the school year. But everybody has something going on all of the time. Adults and children alike. And sometimes it's small things. Sometimes it's, I didn't like what I had for breakfast this morning and that's put me in a bad mood. Sometimes it's, I didn't have any breakfast this morning and that's put me in a bad mood. Sometimes it's, I couldn't have any breakfast this morning. There was nothing in the kitchen and that's put me in a bad mood. There's a whole spectrum. There's a whole spectrum. And it's important to be cognizant of that. And it's important to make sure that any whole school approach to well-being appreciates the fact that some things are world-ending, some things are minor inconveniences, and they can feel that way. Sometimes a minor inconvenience can feel like it's the end of the world. And that's really important, particularly with our very young children, because for them it is. I'm always reminded of something somebody told me about why toddlers, when they fall over and scrape their knee, they burst into tears. And it's because they've had so few experiences up to that point that actually scraping their knee is one of the worst things that has ever happened to them. And as we get older and more things happen to us, we develop better coping strategies. And I suppose it's also why our pupils who maybe have been a little bit sheltered by their parents find coping a little bit more difficult, because they haven't had that range of bad things happening to them. Which is not to say that I think that we should all go through a course of, awful things just to build up our tolerance to them. But it's important to remember that just because something seems minor to us, or even just because something seems major to us, it may not feel that same way to the person going through it, because they will have a different coping strategy. They will have different life experiences that have prepared them to deal with whatever they are going through in the way that they are dealing with it. Which brings me on to resilience. Now, I actually don't want to spend too long talking about resilience this morning, because I feel like resilience in schools has become this buzzword that people trot out, and it doesn't mean anything anymore. We always talk in schools about how we need to improve our pupils' resilience. We always talk about, what resilience is, the bounce back ability, as somebody once put it. But I don't know about you, I'm not sure if it's working. I'm not sure if this focus on resilience is enough. However, you can't do a show about well-being, particularly about well-being at a whole school level, without talking about resilience. So let's spend a couple of minutes just breaking it down. Resilience, remember, is not about not failing. It's not about never falling. And I think that's where we did go wrong for a little while, particularly when I started teaching. It was very much a case of, you've got to try and make sure that the children can access what's going on, that the children always know what's happening, that the children are set up to succeed. Then that kind of came out of fashion. And then it became, if they are always getting things right, then it's not difficult enough. And for some reason, the response to that became, let's start asking them questions about stuff we've not taught them, just so that they can get something wrong, so that they can build up their resilience. And now we seem to be cycling back round again to setting them up for success. Now, academically, I believe very much in setting our pupils up for success. I believe that I should teach my pupils something, give them the opportunity to try it out for themselves, to talk about it, because knowledge is made communally, and then test them on exactly what I've just taught them to check whether they've understood what I've just taught them. Because if I teach them something and then I test them on something completely different that they've never ever heard of, that doesn't actually tell me whether they've learnt what I've just taught them. It doesn't actually build up their resilience. It just undermines me and my subject, because I've gone off on a complete tangent that is entirely unfair. So I do think sometimes we take the wrong approach to resilience. I sometimes think we manufacture these episodes to try and encourage resilience, rather than encouraging it as it crops up naturally in the day-to-day lives of our young people, and indeed of our adult colleagues. So resilience is the ability to survive and thrive under difficult conditions. So an example that I found is, if a child is sitting alone in the playground, maybe they've gone over to the friendship bench. I don't know if they're still popular in primary schools. They were when I was a primary teacher. All the playgrounds had a friendship bench where you would go and sit if you had no one to play with, and then someone would come along and they would play with you. But is that child more resilient if they themselves go to find a group of people to play with, instead of waiting for someone to come and play with them? Or is that child resilient for going, no one wants to play with me right now, so I'm going to wait until somebody does. I do think sometimes we give mixed messages about what resilience is, about what we expect it to be. Resilient people, according to this definition I found, continue to develop their own potential even when circumstances are against them. And it develops all the time through the meeting of challenges successfully. So once again, resilience is actually built by setting them up to succeed. Resilience is built by going, do you know what? This is hard, but you're not going to give up. And sometimes I think the interception comes at the wrong point. Sometimes I think we see the child try, we see them give up, and then we intervene with a discussion about resilience. But actually, what needs to happen is that the discussion comes in just before the child is about to give up. I saw this with a year 11 lesson that I taught yesterday. I gave them a reading past paper, and it was actually really difficult. It was a horrid paper. It was all about the environment, which is one of the most difficult topics on the MFL GCSE, in my opinion. There was a question that was all about electric cars. There was a question that was all about organic produce. It was difficult. And I watched as one of my pupils read the text, read the questions, went back and read the text, put his head in his hands, read the text again, and then I saw him go to put his pen down on the table. And that was the point that I intervened. Because I thought, if I let him put his pen down, that's when he's going to stop. And actually, if I then go over to him and I say, no, come on, we can do it, pick your pen back up and let's go, the mindset of stopping, the mindset of giving up has already taken root. But if I could intervene before the pen hits the table, while he's still in the process of giving up, that's when I can build the resilience. And so I did. I just went and I kind of perched on the table next to him, and I asked him to translate the questions for me. And that alone was enough for him to then get through the rest of the text and to answer the questions and to get them right. So I think when we talk about resilience, we need to think very carefully about the point at which we build it. We need to make sure that challenges are challenging, but that our children meet them. And we need to remember that people give up, and quite often giving up means stopping. And there is a reluctance to go back to it, and there is even if they go through the motions of going back to the exercise, that's just a proxy. That's a proxy for learning, because mentally they've already stopped. So if we are building resilience into our whole school approach for well-being, we've got to make sure that our interventions and our interceptions come at the right time. Otherwise, all we're doing is patronizing somebody by telling them they can do something after they've already decided that they're going to give up. And that is not the right time. That's not the right time. But there are people who have written better on resilience than I've just spoken. There are people who give CPD courses on resilience better than what I've just explained. So we're not going to dwell on that any longer. I said that we weren't going to spend too long on it at all. And 15 minutes later, here we are. Can you imagine what it's like being in one of my lessons? Seriously, I have to stop myself from talking. It's important at this point to note, now that we're beginning to move on from resilience, what the stats are. 1 in 10 children and young people, so 1 in 10 people below the age of 18, will be affected by mental health issues. despite so many children needing support, despite 1 in 10 needing support, only 1 in 4 of those people with mental health issues will have access to specialist mental health services. And this is, in my opinion, to do with funding and to do with availability. Amongst young people, there is no longer the stigma of mental health issues like there is with my generation, for example. We have seen on social media that the influencers, the people that the children are watching, even if they shouldn't be, are very open about their mental health issues. Children who have been diagnosed with autism, with ADHD, with OCD, with any of the many differing issues that we might talk about, are quite often these days very open about it. And, there are so many accounts, particularly on TikTok, I have noticed there are so many accounts that post videos with captions like, this is what a day in the life of someone with ADHD is like. This is what the day in the life of an autistic person is like. So, our children are very much aware of mental health issues. They are very much aware of talking about it. They are very much aware of the help that is available. It's just the accessing of that help that can be difficult. Now, as schools, we have to remember that we are not mental health professionals. Apart, of course, from anybody who is a mental health professional who may have then made a career change into teaching. But I personally am a teacher. I trained as a teacher. I qualified as a teacher. I'm a linguist. I have qualifications in linguistics, but I'm not a doctor yet. I won't be a medical doctor. In a few years, I'll be a doctor of education, but that's entirely different. It will never, ever be my place certainly to diagnose a child. And it will never, ever be my place to say, this is what you definitely should do, because I'm not qualified to do that. What I am qualified to do, and what I am in a position to do, is offer mental health first aid, talk to people who are more qualified, better qualified than I am, who can then signpost the child and the child's family to support that can actually help them. And I think that this is really important, because I think sometimes as schools, we are expected to do more than we are able. And I do think, if we're being very honest, sometimes we create a rod for our own back by suggesting that we can do more than we are able. One of my colleagues on my EdD course works in social services. She is an autism specialist, and she works a lot with children, young people on the spectrum and their families to help them to access the wider services that they need. And, she talks to us about her job, not in specifics, obviously, but kind of like what the day-to-day is, what she has to do. And I can't do that. I can't do what she does. I don't have that knowledge. And if I pretended that I did, because I'm the teacher, and so I should be the one that helps the child, I would be doing that child a disservice. So I think in adopting a whole school approach to well-being, particularly for our children, it's really important to acknowledge what the teacher can and should do. Obviously, what are our statutory safeguarding requirements, but also just in terms of being a good human being, what should we be doing to help these children. But it should also be very important to recognize what we shouldn't do, what we can't do if we are not appropriately trained to do so, and where we signpost, where we can direct people to, or where we as the teacher can be directed in order to get the help that we need to support that young person. Now, of course, as I've said, this is difficult because there are lacks of funding, because more and more is being put onto schools in terms of helping young people, which is having a knock-on effect of mental health services, of social services, having their funding then reduced, which means that more does come round to the school because there aren't those other services. But those services are vital, those services are necessary, and I think the more we can signpost to them and the more we can show to the people who are in charge of these kinds of fundings that no, schools cannot do all of this on their own. There needs to be that multi-agency network that we dream of, that we talk about having, because we do share more information, but that could be better. The more we are going to help these young people. By pretending that schools can do everything and by buying into the idea that schools can do everything, quite often we do a disservice to our young people. With 1 in 10 children and young people being affected by mental health issues, and with only 1 in 4 of those young people accessing or being able to access any kind of extra support, part of a whole school approach to well-being needs to be identifying where in the county, where in the catchment, whatever it might be, there are support services that can be accessed, and what the easiest, most straightforward, most less embarrassing, whatever it might be, ways to access those services are. So if we're thinking about a whole school approach then, which is kind of where I've been going, is the whole point of this show, we need to think about what a whole school approach actually is. A whole school approach is cohesive, it is collective, and it is collaborative. It is action within the school community, it is action by the school community that has been constructed. There are so many C's in this definition that have been constructed to improve learning, behavior, and well-being. We've got ourselves a nice triangle there of 3 things that are interconnected. Learning, behavior, well-being are all dependent upon each other and the conditions that exist to support these. A whole school approach involves all parts of the school working together and being committed. It needs partnership between governors, senior leaders, teachers, and all school staff, as well as parents, carers, and the wider community. Now, I'm going to add something to that. I think a whole school approach also needs partnership with the children. I think if your school is going to take a whole school approach to well-being, which I think it should, then the children need to be aware that that's a priority in school. And the children need to be aware of the role that they play in facilitating well-being. Which is not to say that we start saying to our kids, oh, you're driving me towards a breakdown because of your behavior. But sometimes I think they genuinely don't know how their behavior can and does impact the well-being of their teachers and of their classmates. So I think a whole school approach does need to be a whole school approach, and it's not just adults looking out for the well-being of the children, but it's also the children being involved in the conversation about their contribution to the community and the impact that they have on all of the people around them. It's widely recognized, it's widely reported, it's widely cited, it's widely researched that a child's emotional health and well-being influences their cognitive development and their learning, and their physical and social health, and their mental well-being in adulthood. And this is why well-being should be at the heart of any whole school ethos. It should be at the heart of any school, because it's going to impact our young people well into adulthood. And again, it's not just about resilience. It's not just about, since we appear on Twitter to be having a conversation about how walls are decorated in corridors, it's not about putting up some lovely motivational posters in a corridor. And I'm not going to tell you right now what side of that debate I fall down on, mostly because I don't know. It's about centering well-being. It's about actually doing something as opposed to being performative. It's about making sure that everybody knows the role that they have to play in order to make schools a nice, safe place to be. Because it is in those situations that children as learners can thrive and teachers as teachers can thrive. Whole school approaches in general lead to improvement in school culture. They actually alone lead to improvement in staff well-being and in pupil behaviour and in school attendance and in academic attainment. That is from research by Ware from 2015 and Banerjee in 2014. And this is because whole school approaches mean that people know where they stand. I saw a critique this morning. I think it was on Twitter, but it might have been on Facebook. I can't remember. There's too much teacher social media. I saw a critique of schools that post the pedagogy that they use, because that's becoming quite common now, particularly in MFL recruitment adverts. You know, we are a school that does X curriculum. We are a school that believes in Y pedagogy. And I saw somebody saying that felt dogmatic, it felt draconian, it felt like there was no individuality allowed. But actually, I respect schools that do that. You know, if you've listened to the show for a while, you know that I have been interviewing this year. I did a whole show on what my experience about interviewing was like a few weeks ago. Do go back and listen to that one if you haven't. I've had some really interesting feedback on it. Lots of people have said how much they enjoyed it because of how it mirrored many of their own experiences. And I think, as I said in that show, it is really important as a teacher to feel that the school you are in aligns with your values. And it's important for the school that you align with theirs. A culture clash is never going to be good on either side. And one of the benefits for us of the recruitment and retention crisis, and there aren't that many, let's be honest, so let's find silver linings where we can, is that we can be a little bit more picky now about where we choose to work. And so if a school's ethos, if a school's value doesn't align with yours, then you don't have to work there because there will be another job that will come up. And so I think that actually if a school is transparent about its whole school approach, even down to the pedagogy that it encourages or it expects, that can only be a good thing for school culture, for staff well-being, for pupil behaviour, for attendance, for attainment, because it creates consistency. People know where they stand. And so I think what's quite interesting here is this idea that a well-being approach isn't just about what we think it might be about. It's not about compulsory twilight yoga on a Wednesday when instead you could be marking your books so that you could actually go home and watch Netflix like you want to. It's not always about more PPA. It's not always about less paperwork. Or should I say, it's not just about those things. Having a consistent whole school approach to anything and everything helps to improve well-being because people know where they stand. And that's really important. I know I'm repeating myself. I'm aware that I'm repeating myself. But I'm repeating myself because it's true, and I'm repeating myself because it's important. I am going to discuss Ofsted now because regardless of how we feel about them, and regardless of the conversations that are happening right now, they continue to be the government benchmark, if you like, regarding what makes successful schools, what makes successful learning, whatever. And so we do kind of have to at least entertain what they have to say. And they, in fact, talk about links between a whole school approach and their 2019 framework. It says the curriculum and the provider's wider work support learners to develop their character, including their resilience, which must be why it's plastered over every school, confidence and independence, and help them to know how to keep physically and mentally healthy. So once again, having a whole school approach to well-being helps you to tick an Ofsted box if that's something that is important to you. But what does a whole school approach towards well-being look like in action? We've kind of talked about what it's not. We've talked about how it's not these buzzwords, about how it's not just resilience, about how it's not just more PPA. But what actually is it? What does it look like? And of course, it starts at the top. It starts with leadership and management. There should be a well-being coordinator role within leadership responsibilities. And given that I am nobody in the grand scheme of things, I have no control over any kinds of budgets. I have no control over any kinds of staffing, so I can pretty much come up with any great idea that I like and tell you why it should be done. I actually think that there should be 2 members of staff responsible for well-being within a school. Regardless of how big the school is, I think it should be at least 2. I think there should be 1 person who is responsible for the well-being of the children, and that could be the DSL, although that could again be a completely separate role. But I also think that there should be a separate adult in charge of adult well-being. Because quite often, the role of the DSL and of children's well-being and of adult well-being is wrapped up into 1 person. It's usually wrapped up into the safeguarding lead. But it's too much for 1 person. With all due respect to all the safeguarding leads out there, you do an amazing job. You do a job that I could not do. You also do a huge job having to look after everybody. And I think that if that job could be split, and I think if there were opportunities for teachers like me who are incredibly interested in adult well-being, but not particularly interested in any of the traditional leadership roles that exist. You know, if there were the chance to be an assistant head, or, you know, come up with something new, a whole new job title in charge of adult well-being, in charge of teacher well-being, I would absolutely apply for that. but I'm never going to apply to be deputy head academic or deputy head pastoral or any of those titles, because that's not my path. This is brought to you by the research that I am doing for my EdD. My thesis is all about career paths, but that's a whole separate thing. But I do think that we need to separate out the people who are in charge of the different types of well-being so that they themselves are not overwhelmed, so that their well-being is safeguarded. It's good if there are county-wide mental health support networks of which the leadership and management can be a part. I think it's good if there are toolkits. Again, quite often these happen at county level, that leadership and management can implement, with which they can interact. And of course, there should be a policy. And as with all policies, it should be an actual policy that is implemented and not just something that is available on the website because we think that there should be a policy. Then coming down within the curriculum, within the teaching and learning, it should be part of PSHE or PSHRE or CPSHE or whichever acronym we are giving it these days. And that should have a designated lead, and there should be foci of resilience, mental health, well-being, and social skills. And again, those things should look at an individual level. What are you feeling? But also at a community level, and thinking very much about how our actions impact on the well-being of other people. Of course, the more we can offer as a school, the better. The more clubs we can offer, arts, music, sport, so that we give our young people the opportunity to express themselves in the way that they want to, in the way that they feel safe to, the better. We should have a creative writing club so that the children who like to express themselves through stories can do so. We should have an art journaling club so that the children who like to keep a diary and stick some lovely stickers on and do some watercolor paintings in their journal, so that they can do that. We would hope, of course, that these things existed outside of the school network, but offering them within school, because these are things that we can offer, because we have art teachers, we have sports teachers, we have creative writing teachers. This isn't like trying to be social services and doing things that we're not qualified for. These are things that we are qualified to do, and we can offer them as an outlet for our children. But this is also why the arts are so important within the curriculum, because they give a child an outlet. And why should an outlet always be extracurricular? Why should well-being always be extracurricular? Why can't it be something that is on, or that is a subject that is then tested at GCSE? So I'm going off on all of my rants today. I've just got all my soapboxes lined up and I'm climbing on them. But I think it's because for me, well-being is everything. And everything is well-being. And if we are doing school properly, if we are doing education properly, then we are giving our pupils what they need to succeed. And to succeed in their lives, they need knowledge, they need health, both mental, emotional, and physical. That's not both, that's 3. And they need outlets, they need coping strategies. Tim has texted in, good morning to you. Always lovely to hear from you here on Saturday morning breakfast. Say that he wants to be in those clubs. Yes. Now, okay. There should be clubs for adults. There should be these exact clubs for grown-ups. And interestingly, what I've noticed as I kind of looked at different offerings while I was prepping for today's show is that lots of schools do put on sport for adults. You know, you can play as part of the teachers' cricket team. You can play on the teachers' football team. Quite often, you know, you see teachers versus year 11 first as a charity fundraiser. But you often see less of the artistic, creative things offered for teachers. And where they are offered, it's usually as a way of poking fun at teachers. So teacher drama tends to only exist so that they can put on a panto to make the kids laugh at Christmas. Teacher music usually only exists so that at the school music festival, the teachers can get up and do a song at the end, deliberately designed to make the kids laugh. And so once again, it's very much child-facing. But if more things were done for the adults that were serious, that were not sporty for the non-sporty teachers, and that were a creative outlet. So again, I'm not saying more, let's go down to the pub after school on Friday, but let's have Friday lunchtime art journaling just for teachers. I think that would help to improve the well-being for the adults within our school community. And as I keep saying, this is just as important for the adults as it is for the children. Student voice is also really important for pupil well-being. We know that children like to feel heard. Children don't get to make many of their own decisions. They are shuttled around. They are told what lessons they are going to when, because, you know, that's how timetables work. Their days are controlled by bells and then by parents telling them what to do and what time they should be home. They have very little autonomy. It's why when toddlers learn the word no, they start using it all the time, because they feel so out of control that they try and take some by just point blank refusing to do things. Pupil voice is one of the times that we can give our children a say. We might not always like what they have to say. What they have to say might not always gel with what is feasible, because of course they don't always understand the logistics of a school. But at least giving them the opportunity to feel like they're being heard is good for their well-being. We all want to be listened to. Knowing that you can be listened to and still told, no, I'm sorry, that won't work because, is a good life lesson. It's a good lesson in resilience. But quite often it is just the feeling of being listened to, the feeling of being heard, that helps to build up mental well-being. And so having a student voice, having a student council, whatever it might be, whatever it looks like in your school, is incredibly important. Again, not just as a box-ticking exercise, and not even just about implementing school improvement, but for the well-being of your children. Let's talk about staff well-being, because that's kind of where this started. The whole idea of this show came from those reports that we were hearing out of that school in Wales on Wednesday evening, where the teaching staff were being praised rightly for their bravery, their heroism in how quickly that situation was dealt with. And I thought about what the aftermath of that is going to be. I thought about the pressure that we have as teachers to be brave, to be heroic. I thought about the lockdown procedure in my own school and what my responsibilities as the classroom teacher are, and how, of course, as the adult, I have to put the children's well-being above my own. And of course I do, because I'm the adult. But then I thought, who is looking after the well-being of these teachers? What does the aftercare for the teachers in that school in Wales look like? And that then got me thinking about staff well-being in general. So a whole school approach to well-being is not a whole school approach if it does not consider the well-being of its staff. If it only considers the well-being of the children, then it's a child-centric approach. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are teachers. We are child-centric. But I'm saying that a whole school approach is better, and a whole school approach should involve the whole school. So this is also where I'm going to kind of caveat what I'm going to talk about for the next 20 minutes, because I will probably say the word teacher a lot, because I am a teacher, and that's where I'm coming from. What I mean, and I mean no disrespect, what I mean is all of the adults within the school community. I'm using teacher as a shorthand for that. I shouldn't. I acknowledge that I shouldn't. But I probably will, just because it will slip out. So when I say teacher, I do mean teachers, but I also mean the reception staff. I mean the cleaners. I mean the maintenance staff. I mean the ground staff. I mean everybody. Well-being can be broken down for adults and children into all sorts of different dimensions. But I've come up with, I think it's 5. Yeah, I've got 5. So I've got self-confidence. I've got the ability to feel and express a range of different emotions. I've got engagement with what's going on around you. I've got living and working productively. And I've got an ability to manage the stress of daily life. And I came up with those by thinking about what I can't do when I'm not feeling very well. So in case you are new to the show, I make no secret of the fact that I was diagnosed a couple of years ago with comorbid depression anxiety. I take daily antidepressants to help me manage that. It was something that I was reluctant to share at the beginning because there is still a stigma, particularly of teachers who suffer with these things, because of course we are the adults. We are the ones who are in charge, who are in control. But I think I also have a duty to myself and to other teachers who suffer in the same way that I do, because I have this platform, because I have my voice, to show that we recognize when we're feeling well and when we're feeling not. And actually, if we are in a setting that supports us when we are feeling unwell, then there is absolutely no issue with us doing our job. And again, my setting, my school has been amazing. It's not often that I've had to call in sick due to my mental health, but when I have, there have been no questions asked. There has been no sense of, oh, well, it's not like you've broken your leg, you should come in anyway. Cover has always been provided for me. A teacher has always been provided for me. I've set my cover lessons where I felt able and where I haven't. My HODs have been great at stepping in and setting it. My school has been amazing. And again, if you are somebody who needs that support, then ask about it if you're interviewing. Because if your school doesn't offer it, if the school you're interviewing at doesn't offer it, but you need it, then you're going to go and find somewhere that does. Because that's important. It's for your well-being. So those are the things that we look for: confidence, feeling expressing your emotions, feeling engaged, living and working productively, coping with day-to-day stress. I don't like that last one because I think it's a shame that there's day-to-day stress. There are also things that can impact on our well-being. Oh, Chris has texted in. Good morning to you. Chris said, such an important topic. My current setting is incredibly supportive, but my previous job in education as a music teacher was one where mental health was completely stigmatized and employees sent to occupational therapy assessments. Chris, I'm so sorry to hear that is something that you have experienced, that you have experience of. Again, I'm not going to say that being sent to an occupational therapy assessment is a bad thing necessarily, so long as it gives the teacher the support that they need. And again, that's what a whole school approach to well-being should be about. It shouldn't be about stigmatizing, to use the word that Chris used there. It should be about support. And it should be about, you are a good teacher who is going through a difficult time, and we're going to help you. We are going to put things into place that can help you. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate your thoughts on what we've been talking about today. It was really good to hear from you. There are lots of things that can impact well-being. The big ones are loss, perhaps a death, perhaps a marriage breakdown, perhaps empty nest syndrome. Times of change, particularly again around this time of year. If you are changing schools, that can impact your well-being. Even if it's going to be a good change, it can still impact on your feelings of wellness. Maybe you're moving house. A friend of mine has just bought a house. And so she was kind of preparing the move while preparing to conduct A-level speaking assessments. Feelings of isolation and being alone can impact your well-being. Friendship or relationship problems. We talk a lot about friendship issues with kids, but they happen with adults as well. Particularly right now, if we're going through a high-stress period. Let's say you are, I don't want to keep talking about MFL, although that is, of course, my subject. But let's say you are a music teacher. Chris, you've inspired me. Let's say you are a music teacher and you are doing the practical coursework, for example, and it's a very stressful time, making sure that you're getting the kids in, making sure that the instruments are ready for them, making sure that your recording equipment is tuned, whatever it is that you might have to do. It then might only be that the assessment you're conducting runs on. So it overlaps with the beginning of an assessment that another music teacher wanted to conduct, and that could cause friction. Not because you don't get on, but because of that high stress. So that then is a friendship issue. And then, of course, there is worry, there is concern about school, about work, about money. We're in a cost of living crisis. We seem to have been in some kind of financial crisis constantly since I graduated. So money is quite often the worry. We hear about schools, independent schools, pulling out of the TPS because they can't afford to keep up with the employer contributions, and that might make people worry about the security of their job. All sorts of things can cause worry, which can then in turn impact. Chris has texted in to add to what they'd said before. Assessments were done if a member of staff was seen out in public whilst on leave, citing mental health reasons. It was abundantly clear that the OT assessments were there to prove the need for time off was bogus, hugely toxic, and resulted in a mass exodus of staff. That's actually a really important point, Chris. Thank you for bringing it up, because I think it's something that does remain stigmatized. So there is the idea that if you are signed off of work, then you should essentially be housebound. And I think that comes from taking physical health stuff and overlaying it onto mental health stuff. So there is this idea that if you are off work sick, if you're off work sick with a broken leg, then you're not going to be down Sainsbury's because you are at home with your leg healing. But mental health issues are different. Quite often, actually, if you have got somebody who is off with, let's say, anxiety, being at home alone ruminating is going to exacerbate that. That person may not be up to teaching. They may not be up to the constant decision making minute by minute. They might not be up to standing in front of 35 kids and performing. But it's also not healthy for them to sit alone at home. And so maybe nipping down to Tesco, other supermarkets are available, gets them out of the house. It breaks a repetitive thought cycle and is actually part of their recovery. And I think, Chris, you are absolutely right that in this case, there is this idea that, oh, if you can be out of your house, then you can be at work. And there is an ignoring of the mental part of mental health, wellness, of the fact that it's the mind that is not functioning optimally. And I think, again, the more of us who speak about these things, particularly in teaching, the more of us who raise awareness, then hopefully we will see a change. We will see a change in how people view it and how people consider it. Because quite often, for many people, being home alone is the worst thing that they can do while they are signed off of work. I'd like to talk about anxiety for a second. Anxiety is obviously one of my big two. I think, like I said, my diagnosis is anxiety and depression. I think my anxiety is worse than my depression, I feel. And it is quite often exacerbated at this time of year because we are in a high anxiety time of year for teachers. Because again, we are prepping for exams. Let's preface this by saying anxiety is normal. Anxiety is a completely normal response. It is a physiological response that we have evolved to have as a way of helping us to survive. We hear it called the flight or fight response. I, in my therapy, learned that it's not called that anymore. They now talk about fight, flight, or fawn. Because there is this idea, and it's the thing that I do, where if you're feeling anxious, you start being overly nice. Because you think that if you can be overly nice to somebody, then that's going to placate them, and so they are less likely to be angry and make your anxiety worse. And it's the process of adrenaline being quickly pumped through your body to allow you to cope with whatever catastrophe might be happening. Now, of course, it's brilliant when you are being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, because that adrenaline is going to go into your leg muscles so you can run. I don't know if you would be able to outrun a saber-toothed tiger. I wouldn't. I think even with all the adrenaline in my body, I would just accept my fate. But the fact is, one of my pupils doing a speaking exam is not a threat to my life, but my body perceives it in that way, or my brain perceives it in that way, and sends the signals to my body that we need the flight, fight, or fawn. And I can feel it. I really feel it in my legs. I know when I'm about to have an anxiety attack or a panic attack because my legs go really tingly. And that is the adrenaline pumping, getting ready for me to run. But what am I running from? Because you can't run from your own brain. And so that's the other thing that we need to remember, is that quite often there is a physical response to mental health issues. The times that I've taken off of work, times that I've called in sick with my depression and anxiety, have not actually been when I'm in the cycle, but they've been in the aftermath, where my body is just so exhausted from having all of this adrenaline and all this cortisol pumping through it, but I haven't run away from anything, so I've not actually burnt it off, and it just keeps pumping because the part of my brain that does this is on high alert all of the time, and I can't get out of bed the next day because I am just so physically tired. And that's the big difference. Everybody feels some kind of anxiety. But for those of us who have some kind of anxiety disorder, we feel that way pretty much all the time, and to a more intense level. And I think that's something that people have to keep in mind. It's a bit like how everybody thinks they can have an opinion about teaching because everyone's been to school. Lots of people think that they can have an opinion about depression and anxiety because everyone has been sad and because everyone feels anxious. But what is important to keep reminding the public at large, is that it's different. There is run-of-the-mill anxiety, and then there is this over-the-top physical chemical release that those of us with an anxiety disorder have, and they are not the same. They are not the same. Because we get both. And having a panic attack, having an anxiety disorder is worse. It feels worse. Unfortunately, as I've said, quite often as adults, we're left alone to cope with these things. Because until my great idea of having a deputy head in charge of adult well-being is implemented in all schools, then the time and the effort and the resources are always going to go into the children, which, children need our time and our effort and our resources. But it does mean that a lot of the time we need to think about our own well-being and to put ourselves first. So I'm going to pull out good old, it was Brabham and Turkington in 2002, the stress bucket. So the stress bucket was this analogy that Brabham and Turkington came up with. And it's this idea that people have different sizes of buckets. Some people have got really, really big buckets. Some people have got very, very small buckets. When filling up the buckets, some people's taps are turned on very, very fast. Some people's taps just trickle. The bucket will fill. And for some people, depending on the size of their bucket and how fast the tap is on, it will overflow faster than for others. Now, of course, in the analogy, the bucket is your ability to cope with stress, your ability to manage your own well-being. The water that's flowing are the stressors, the factors that are making you stressed. And then the overflow is the snap. The overflow is the point where you can't cope anymore. Now, your bucket has got a hole in it. At least one. So it's not constantly overflowing. Some people's buckets have lots of holes. Some people's buckets have holes that are caused by rest and relaxation. Some people's buckets have holes that are caused by talking to people that they trust. Some people's buckets have holes that are caused by playing five-a-side on a Saturday afternoon. Some people's buckets have got holes caused by time management. The holes in your bucket are a good thing. because the holes in your bucket allow that water, that stress, to flow out without overflowing, because it's the overflow that we don't want. Some people's holes are bigger than others. I'm not liking this analogy anymore. Some people's holes are smaller. Some people don't have as many in their bucket as others. And when you then combine all of these different factors, that's when you have the amount of stress that you can cope with. If you've got a small bucket with very few holes and a fast running tap, you are going to snap quicker than someone who has got a big bucket with lots of holes and a slow running tap. And there are not many things in this analogy that we control. I think the only thing in the analogy that we really control are the holes. And this is where self-care comes in. I've talked about self-care on the show before. In fact, I may have even done a show on self-care. Self-care for a long time was very trendy. It was very much used as an excuse to put off responsibilities. It was very much always about, let's put on pajamas and a face pack and watch Netflix in the bath with some candles. But actually, and as I have said on the show before, self-care is about drilling those holes in this bucket so that your stress doesn't overflow. So again, sometimes self-care, drilling this hole, whatever you want to use, is about talking to your friends. Sometimes it's about going into school on a Sunday because you have got so much marking to do and you can't stop thinking about it. I've done that before, where I left my marking at school because I thought actually it was better self-care not to do it. But actually I just spent the whole of my Saturday thinking about it. So I went into school on Sunday and did it, and I felt immediately better for having done it. And this is one of the reasons why adult well-being is slightly more difficult to manage, to help with at a whole school level than child well-being, because we all have different things that make these holes. So one of the best things that you can do for your own well-being, and one of the best things that you can actually do to help your school help you to manage your well-being, is to know what your self-care rituals are, to know what drills holes into your bucket, because then you know what to ask for. And again, until we have adult well-being responsibilities in school, if any schools are hiring an adult well-being manager, then please do get in touch, because we can talk. But until that happens and you have got somebody who is responsible for looking out for your well-being, you must do it yourself. And ultimately, I think that's what I would like all of us who have listened to the show. Had some great listeners today, some amazing comments today. Thank you all so much to everybody who has listened, who has texted in, who has commented. If we're taking just one thing away today, it's that we need this whole school approach to well-being, because children need well-being, adults need well-being. But as an adult, you must make sure that you are prioritizing yours, that you are taking care of yours, and that you are asking for what you need. Because it's very unlikely, even in the most amazing school, that your colleagues around you are going to notice all of the time when you're not feeling very well. Because, of course, they will be prioritizing the children. And that's not a bad thing. It's just about finding that balance. As always, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to fill my 90 minutes today, and I'm now running over. Thank you all ever so much for listening. I do hope that you've managed to take something away from today. I know that I have. I took quite a lot away from my research into this show. I'm really happy to have done it. Please do stay tuned into Teachers Talk Radio. We have got, as always, lots of amazing hosts, lots of amazing shows on a diverse range of topics. So please do stay tuned in to all of the things that we've got coming up over the next week. Next weekend is the bank holiday weekend. I am planning on being here, but do keep an eye on my Twitter just in case anything comes up. But hopefully it won't. So I will be with you next Saturday. Thank you all ever so much for listening, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.